I have a couple things I want to tell you about Sue. She's worked in the museum field for over 30 years in New Hampshire, Vermont, and the Midwest. And she came to Vermont in 1985 to take a course in weaving at the Marshfield, Vermont School of Weaving. And that got her into textiles and got her into collecting and spinning and all kinds of stuff that she is going to tell us about. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and the library for inviting me to come and do this program. As I mentioned a minute or two ago, I haven't done this particular configuration of this program before, but it's been something that's been running around in my head for about a year and a half. I went to a seminar in Genesee County Farm Museum out in western New York. And Rabbit Goody, who is a professional weaver in northern New York, presented a session, and she named it her talk was, she had enough to be comfortable. So I got curious, what kind of textiles did it take for the bedroom for someone to be comfortable in the late 18th and early 19th century? In the introduction, Kay didn't read this, but that's fine. It was said, sleeping was a textile-intensive experience. And I hope I can share with you just what it took to be comfortable. I would like to start with the bedstead, what we usually would call the bed. It's the wooden frame that holds the bed, which we call a mattress, and a box spring. Let's use our imaginations and picture a four-poster bed, or a bed like we have at the log cabin in the fairgrounds with the shorter post. Those were the most typical bedsteads, although sometimes we did have box beds. They would have been built in along a wall, or like Thomas Jefferson's was built between his study and dressing room. Kept it handy. Many homes in the early 19th century only had 4 rooms, 2 up and 2 down. If that was the situation, the bedstead might have been in the same room as the room where people gathered. At Counter Prairie in Indiana, where I worked for 15 years, it was decided that Mr. and Mrs. Connor's bed would be in the main room of the house. At times, this room was used as a courtroom. Well, I remember we of the staff thought this was really kind of particular. But we have to also remember that Queen Victoria hadn't installed her ideas on us yet in the 1820s. Some households in the winter, the bed was brought into the kitchen or the keeping room. I read an 1860 diary by a rural woman from Woodstock, Vermont. She said she put the bed up in the kitchen in the winter and later took it down and moved it back to the bedroom. Of course, the kitchen was the warmest room of the house. I know where the family lived, and I drive by it often, and I think about that process and that family that lived in that home. Separate bedrooms for couples and children didn't become common until the late 19th century. A bedstead was either strung with a canvas over pegs, and they would wrap ropes around those pegs that would hold the canvas, or ropes strung through the holes on the bed rails, which is like the one that we have at the fair. To tighten those ropes, they used a bed key. This is my bed key. It is a little broke, but I think it would work if I needed it. The rope was woven from front to back and then from side to side, and you would put the bed key, the rope goes in here, the rail of the bed is here, and you would tighten it up as tight as you could, and then someone would hold that on the inside of the rail so you could go to the other side and do the other side, and you did it down the rail until you had it tight. Well, how about good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. I bet every one of us have said that at least once. And I know I used to say it to my kids a lot. I, along with many others, thought that meant the ropes along the bed should be tight. But boy, was I wrong. Sleep tight means to sleep well. The website that explains this asks, who ever heard of wishing a piece of furniture to sleep well? And it apparently came from an early 20th century novel. So it's a 20th century saying. So on top of these ropes, you put your first tick, which is a large cloth sack, usually made from a sturdy fabric, filled with whatever they could fill, whatever they had to fill it with. The one in our log cabins filled with corn husks. They were also filled with straw, oak husks, leaves, or whatever was available. Sometimes this was the only mattress people had. The filler should be replaced once a year around harvest time. And soldiers would often be told to carry along a cloth bag and use whatever they could find for their mattress. Most people by the early 19th century or into the 19th century had a feather mattress, or we call them feather beds. These were put on top of the straw ticks. If you didn't inherit one, which is what you would hope to do, you would need to save the feathers, or you could purchase feathers. They recommended buying 50 pounds of feathers.
Oh my gosh. That's only for this.
I used to say at Connor, a feather bed was the most expensive household item a man owned. I took apart an old feather bed once. I don't recommend it. It was the biggest mess I've ever done, I think. There was every kind of feather you could think of in that tick. There was cardinal and blue jay and chicken and brown feathers and white feathers and everything else. I took it apart to make pillows out of it. And I have to admit, I wish I hadn't done it, but I did. To get down from a goose or a duck, but they primarily used geese, they had to be plucked when they were molting. You put a sock over the head of the goose, turn it upside down in your arm, and pull out the feathers. If you ever want to try this, be sure and put a sock over that goose's head, because let me tell you, that pinches awful. That hurts.
That's hurt the goose.
Of course, they also saved the feathers from a duck or a goose that they had killed for food. The feathers after they were harvested had to be washed and cleaned, and we never went on and did that next step, but I think it would have been pretty awful, because we all know how wet feathers stink like. A feather bed was then covered by a linen sheet. Linen was a crop that farmers grew, using part of the crop for textile use, saved the seeds for the next year, or sold some for linseed oil. The map in the log cabin has listed in the 1850 census 247,715 pounds of flax were grown in Orange County. Now that's 1850. Historians say the growing of flax basically ceased for textile reasons in the 1830s because cotton had gotten cheap. So did they raise flax just to sell for linseed oil? Or were there still some raising textile flax? And of course that's a question I can't answer. In Royalton town history, flax was being grown in 1843, and we have some at the fair that it was also dated 1843. So we know some were growing it, at least that late. And how do I know the flax from Royalton was used for textiles? When you plant your flax seed, you plant it as early as you can get into the ground, which is, you hope by the end of April or the very 1st of May. It stays in the ground for 11 weeks. If you count that up, that's almost going to be right at the end of July. It can stay in the ground longer if you need the seeds, but if you're going to use it for good textile flax, you need to pull it then. So flax is a crop that's, this is a linen sheet of mine, which I'll lay out, and we can, later you can come up and view it, handle it. Flax is a crop that's not easy to grow. It doesn't like weeds, and you have to plant it very close together because you want it to be as long as it can be. So you don't want it to sprout out at the top. It is really pretty when it blooms. It's that little light blue flower that we think of when we see flax. Today the flax that we're growing is been bred to be short and for decorative purposes only. Even the flax that's grown for linseed oil is short so that they can combine. So you pull the flax in July and you dry it, hang it over a fence, take it in, of course, if it's going to rain. And then I like to do it basically right around fair time. When we have those beautiful fall days, the sun is bright, and there's dew in the morning on the ground. So you spread your flax. There's 2 ways you can red it, which is redding is a process of rotting the exterior part of the plant. Because what you're going to spin is the capillary system. So you red that plant, and I like to spread it out on my grass, mow the grass off really short, let the chlorophyll from the grass and the sunshine and the dampness work on that plant. Now it's going to take longer that way. And I find that is the hardest thing to know when that's done. Because it's damp, and you want to be able to take that flax and break it, not like that, so that you can see the interior part of the plant. And it's damp, so you almost have to do it, think you've got it done, bring it in the barn, let it dry, and if it isn't far enough, then hopefully you've got time to take it back out and do it again that year. If not, you'll have to wait till the next year. It is an art, and it's an art that we've all forgotten because we didn't have to.
I'll be reason for that.
So after you've redded the flax and got it so that you're ready to, you hang it back in the barn and let it dry. And in the dead of winter, the men would go to the barn and break it. And breaking the flax is a hard job. It's a job, I'm sure women did it, but primarily was done by the men. They did it in the barn for a number of reasons, but mainly is it's very messy. And the chaff then was used for bedding for the animals. So it was right there for them to use. So to break the flax, and you just keep beating it and beating it and beating it and beating it. And you just can't be abusive enough to the plant. And after, of course, this hasn't been done near long enough, but after you do it, you take a board. We used a piece of plywood, to be honest. It was about like that. And I'm going to use the end of this brick. And you scotch it. Were you ever threatened to get a good scutching from your grandfather? But this is a scutching knife. They were just wooden knives. But you beat that plant. And I've been told that is the most important job you do. It is also the most awful job you do. because it vibrates in your hand, it hurts, and you just can't do it long enough. We modern people, I'm not patient to death like this, but you just beat it and beat it and beat it and beat it and beat it until you get rid of as much of that chaff as humanly possible. Because if you have it in your flax, then when you go to use the hatchel, and I'm sure if you've ever been to an auction or museums or anything, you've seen these.
Oh, they're cool.
They're hatchels, they're just iron spikes. They go through the bottom of a piece of wood. They come in many different sizes. I grabbed this one just because it was handy. I've got too many. I did just buy this one about a year ago. I don't know why, but I did. So you've worked this flax, and now I'm going to be honest, this I've done pretty well, but I wanted to show you how to use the hatchel. But you pull it through, and till you've gotten rid of that chaff. And you have to keep doing it around your hand, around that hatchel, because if there's any chaff left in that, when you go to spin it, it comes up under your fingernail, and that hurts. I know from experience. Also, you only probably ever hit your hand once or twice on those hatchels. And you learn, you just keep your hands away. They came in many sizes, and you always started with the coarser one and moved down to the finest one so that you were ready to spin. The women, the men did the breaking and the scutching. The women often did the hatcheling. Sometimes young men would make decorative of those and give them to their brides to be as gifts. So sometimes you see them really beautiful. Also, the scutching knives were gifts that were sometimes given to young women, although what I've read, there isn't a lot of evidence that women did that job, but I'm sure we did if we had to. Spinning then came primarily to the women of the family. Spinning was done by a woman or a girl who had no family responsibilities. If you were mom and you had children, you didn't have time to spin. So it would have been grandma, an unmarried aunt, your eldest daughter, somebody in the community. Often people did hire people to do their spinning for them. So not everybody spun, just like not everybody quilted, and not near everybody wove. So it was a task that was shared within your community, whatever small community you had or family would be in your community too. The flax wheel became available in about the 16th century, and it cut down, what did I read, 5 to 6. It speeded things up so fast, so much faster, that a spinner could do as much work in a day that 5 or 6 spinsters could do. Spinning, historically, was done by men. But by the time we here in the colonies or in America, the women were doing the spinning. So I'll do some spinning, and then later, if you want to see more, I can show you. And I cannot spin in a shoe. You have to be able to feel that treble. See, this is what you get when you just sit down and do it. You always have to get the wheel ready for you. And I spin it damp. You don't, people say they don't have to. I use my saliva. Again, there are people that don't. And this distaff does not want to stay up. There. This is the distaff, and have you women ever heard the distaff side of the house? Mm-hmm. So it's the female side of the house. This wheel, I don't know much about. I bought it many years ago now, but it has shaker characteristics, but the man I bought it from, he says I couldn't tell you whether it was shaker or not. There's no markings on it, so. But spinning was a task that took lots and lots of time. The word spinster, see if I can get back on track with my talk. The word spinster came obviously from women that didn't have a family, and until the beginning of the 20th century, it meant someone who spun. After that, it became an unmarried woman. So I'm a spinster. I've been married, but I am a spinster. A linen sheet, a weaver could weave 5 or 6 yards in a day once the loom was set up. This linen sheet was given to me by a friend and a neighbor who had a fire and wanted help in cleaning the coverlet that had been in her family. And I did, and it was saved, and she gave me this, and it was a part of her family. And when you look at it, be sure and look at the stitching along the rolled seams. I don't know many people that can, this day and age, that can make those teeny little stitches like that. So the bed, you've got your bedstead, you've got your linen sheets, but you also had bolsters. Now this is a bolster that my mother picked up someplace, and it really could use some of those feathers that I took out of the feather tip. People didn't lay down like you and I do to sleep. Overall, they sat up, and there's some thought that that's because there was enough, or many people were sick enough, had malaria, had lung problems, had trouble sleeping. So you would put the bolster behind your pillow. The bolsters that I read about were much stiffer than this, and solid. And I really wasn't sure how comfortable that would have been. It probably wouldn't have been for us. But I was surprised. I have a period bed, not a rope bed, it's later than that, but it's the size of a period bed. And I put this behind the bed pillows, and it does, it just holds them right up. So I was surprised. Just this soft, fluffy pillow was very much a help in holding the pillows up like they should have been. Pillows, when I don't have a pillow of the time period, they were more square than ours. Ours are rectangle. They made pillowcases out of the linen and would tie them instead of, that was how they fastened them. The ticking was was woven. It was a dense fabric so that the feathers didn't come out. And it's interesting, this style, this blue and white style of ticking has been around for a long time. And you would think, I have seen some that were plaid or checked, but not very many. Almost all of them are that stripe that we're all familiar with. Most people, I think, started with could have one sheet on their bed. Some may have had enough to have two on their beds, but usually they just had one sheet. I found this in kind of a strange little book that I've forgotten I own. One thing about doing a program like this, you find out what you've got in your library. But these little quotes were taken from a book called Domestic Beans. And this was written by Abigail Adams, who we all know, 32, Braintree, Massachusetts, 1777. I seek wool and flax and can work willing with my hands, and though my household are not clothed in fine linen nor scarlet, they are clothed with what is perhaps as honorary and plain and decent manufacture of my own family, and I do not abound, and I do not want.
Yes.
So Abigail, at least somebody in her family, were working the wool and the flax. This was written by Jeremiah Condit, age 17, West Orange, New Jersey, in 1772. Rose in the morning, though not very early, and went to weaving, yet not very willing, for though I love that, yet it likes me not. And I am in the mind I shall never be well as long as I weave. And on the back, it says, I'm hatcheling flax. This is by Molly Cooper, age 55, Oyster Bay, Long Island, 1769. I have hatched 14 pounds of flax from the swingle, which I'm not sure. A swingle is, Margaret, it's a swingle that your brother had in the house that I couldn't remember what it was called.
Okay.
A swingle was what you used to get the seeds out of your grain. So I'm not sure. Maybe she did 14, maybe she had been swingled, but then she hatched it. This was Martha Ballard. And if you haven't read The Diary of a Midwife, I think that's the name of it. It's a fantastic book. It's a diary written by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. It won a Pulitzer Prize. And she not only took the diary, but she broke it down. And I mean, of course, I loved it, but it's interesting. Martha Ballard was 60 when she wrote that in Augusta, Maine, in 1795. I have been doing things about the house and tended my thread to whiten. Again, that's Martha Ballard. Now, what in the world did she mean to that? She tended her thread to whiten. Well, when you spin flax, there it is. But when you want flax, when you want linen, we want it white, right? So, to get linen white is another hard job. I did this, and it's still not very white, obviously. When you take it off the loom, or the spinning wheel, now this was some of my flax that I spun a few years ago. You take it and you boil it in some kind of a bleach. And I'm going to be honest, I am not sure. They may have used urine. That may have bleached it. It would soften it. I used, I forget now, chemical. You need to boil it and boil it. Again, you can beat it. You lay it out and let the sunshine and the grass work on it to get it soft enough that you can stand it, because it is really hairy and it is rough. I have started with a new apron, and I know this sounds gross, but when I worked at Conner Prairie, we were in log cabins in the year of 1836 in Indiana, and I didn't have a hanky, but boy, my apron came in really handy in the spring. But I would go home and my nose would be all red and sore because the air's soft. It's so rough. by the end of the season, that apron was wonderful. So it softens up. Remember that when people did the laundry and you were doing your linens, you always boiled your white things. And so they would boil their linens. Your linens were your sheets, pillowcases, your women's underwear, our chemises, men's shirts, which is also your underwear, and anything white, towels, diapers, tablecloths, and they were all made out of linen. So the more you did your laundry, the softer your linen got. I've always said Job's hair shirt was a linen shirt. It wasn't wool. This is Molly Cooper, age 58, again on Oyster Bay. Frances began to comb wool. Martha Ballard, 62. I've been carding tow. So what in the world's tow? Tow is what is left in your hatchels. What after you've gotten your flax or you're ready to spin, you're going to have quite a bit of your crop left in the hatchels. They cleaned that up. Obviously, she carded it. That's what they made their feed sacks out of. Anything rough, anything that didn't need to be nice and smooth. And so the tow was used when at all possible. So Molly Cooper, again, age 58, Oyster Bay, Polly gone to carry yarn to the weaver. So she was off. Oh, here's Cyrus is shearing her sheep. Again, Martha Ballard. So I found that interesting little pieces of actual people writing down what they did, because most of the time women didn't write down what they did. And that was one of the hard things about working at Connor. We just didn't know anything about the common farm wife. We knew a lot about the wealthy New Englanders and people who lived in the new capital of Indianapolis, but we were out on the farm and we really didn't know much about what we did. But living history was a brand new job and profession, and they let us experiment, and we learned so much, and it was so much fun. It was probably too much fun, but we had a lot of fun. We did learn an awful lot about how people did what they did. Next would be a blanket. And I have a nice lightweight wool blanket here. I don't remember where I got it. Where are you? I called Teresa this afternoon and said, would you come help me? And it's a twill weave. It's got initials, but I have no idea who made it, when it was made, anything about it. Twill is what our jeans are made out of. That's the weave, the style. So we're really very familiar with it, we just don't know what it's called. The pattern is on one end, but not on the other. And the yarn, I did mend some of it because it was coming loose. But you can see it was sewn down the middle, which was characteristic. Weavers would weave as wide as they could reach, unless they had a flyer loom. So, you know, if it's 30 or if it's 60 inches wide, it was done on a fancy machine. Thank you, Teresa. Here in Vermont, we had there's a piece of new linen. This one's small. Okay. We had what they called summer blankets, winter sheets. So the wool, the cotton was the warp, which is the long pieces on the loom, goes this way, and the weft is what you weave in. We made this at Connor Prairie. They gave it to me when I left the site. We didn't use very good wool. It's really rough. But again, we were learning. We didn't really know. You can see that there's been a moth or two in it. But we did weave it, it's probably about 23 inches wide. You'll find 23 inches or 20, 24, 25 inches is really pretty common. And I think that's because that is a decent width you can reach and throw the shovel. Then I have one more blanket. Teresa, you want to help me with this? This one is called a binder wine. It's professionally woven. Let's see, how can we grab a hold of this? It was given to me by my mother, and my mother got it from a neighbor or a friend in her home, in our hometown. It's a German style pattern. There are several colors in it, obviously, and it's a very technical weave. It was done by a profession. Where, I don't know. It may have, there are a lot of Germans in Indiana, and there was quite a bit of weaving done in Indiana, but it could have come from Pennsylvania too. So it's a really nice piece. It's in perfect shape too.
It's got some weight.
It's heavy. Well, you know, he needed to keep warm.
Is it wool?
All wool.
Yeah.
All wool. Warp.
Is it itchy?
Yeah, nothing like this. You know, yeah, it's all warp or all wool. Meaning that the colors were a part of the warp. And then it was woven in. Many beds also, well, while we're into coverlets, let's just do the coverlets. This one, you might as well stay up here. This one is a New England one. New Englanders like the blue and the yellow, or the gold. Again, somebody, when I worked at Billings Farm and Museum, brought it in and looked and said, "You want this?" And I said, "Oh, sure." As you can see, it's got a hole down there by Teresa's hand, but overall it's a really good, sturdy piece yet. Probably be made sometime before the 1850s, basically. And the yellow, I think, I should have looked it up, but I didn't. The yellow is, I think, an oak that grows around here that was used as a dye. These are called overshot coverlets. Overshot means that the color shoots over the warp threads. But in between each one of those colored threads is a white cotton thread. And that's your base for your fabric. And if you look, later you can look at this piece that's on the table and you can see the wool's all gone. But there is that cotton that's holding the coverlet together. And so the color, I mean, of course it adds weight and warmth and beauty, but it's not, it wouldn't hold up if you didn't have it. Yes, Kay?
What's the difference between a coverlet and a bedspread?
The only thing I can think of is tradition and time period. This time period, this was the top layer. This was the pretty part. But they called them coverlets or coverlids or comfortables. But later then, I think when they became more mass manufactured maybe, and in factories, they become bedspreads. By the end of the 19th century, they're bedspreads. But you're not using these kind of things. Yeah. And I hope if anybody wants to come up and look at this stuff later. This is one I just brought. I bought this in Indiana. I don't know when nor where. It's too bad you don't write those kind of things down, but you may. And I brought it just because it's unusual for some of them to have the red thrown in. The dyeing wasn't done at home. At least the dyeing in these that are so even and so regular in color. There were professional dyers as well as professional weavers. The weaving was done probably by men, although there were women that wove, a few women that wove professionally. This red was probably dyed with cochineal, which is a bug that grows on prickly pear cactuses. It's more like a scale, at least the female is, and it can't move around, and so they scrape it off. They still do. They scrape them off, and that's where you get the color red. When you're looking at red for cochineal, it's more on I always say the purple side of red. I'm not sure, that's a good way of putting it, but they liked the red, but it was expensive. Cochineal still is expensive. The blue, of course, is indigo, and indigo was a plant that, interesting, I just finished this fall reading a book on indigo, and nobody seems to understand why. There are blue plants, or plants all over the world that gives us blue, and they all seem to have appeared in fabrics or wherever, all about the same time. And it's really interesting, but they've got them in China and Japan and South America and Europe. It came to Europe, indigo came to Europe through the Silk Road. But you want to grab the next one? And the next one I almost didn't bring, because it's in pretty bad shape. But I just love the color. And I love the name. The name of it, and it's lighter weight. Part of it is I've used it. And I've used it at the fair. It's been on the bed at the fair. It's a variation of the Mexican, what did I do with that? It's a variation of the blooming leaf of Mexico. Where they got that, I don't know. But I've always kind of dreamed about reproducing this one. Mm-hmm. This color is madder. And madder was grown, could be grown here. I've grown madder. All I can say about growing madder is put it where you don't want anything else to grow but madder, because it spreads. And you use the root. But I just really have always enjoyed this coverlet. But it's bad shape.
And that's wool also?
Yes, wool and cotton. They're all wool and cotton.
I'm noticing that these coverlets are all shorter than anything we would put on our beds, even a double's bed size, not the bigger beds. And that's because you were saying that people sat up, so the bed itself was smaller?
The beds are smaller, not a lot to our full-size bed. We don't have many, most of us don't sleep in full-size beds anymore. I have one too, but it's, they're only, of course they were not standardized. And so they come in, not a wide variation, but they do come in variation. And they didn't drape them over, they laid on the top of the bed. Now this one, I'm going to have to look. You want to hold this a minute because I want to see what Rabbit named this one, and I wasn't familiar with it. She calls this a free plain double cloth. It's 2 layers of cloth, each woven in plain weave, And it's, if you look at it, and then when you turn it, it's right on the other side.
Pretty.
And I've got another one at home. It's not as in good a shape as this one. Also, the dyeing in this one is just incredible because it's almost black. It's so dark.
So it is blue, but
It's navy. Yeah,
it is
it's a dark
navy.
blue.
Yeah.
But I was always told, if you ever find one of these, buy it. So I went to an auction. It wasn't for this coverlet, but another one. And this guy, the auctioneer, held it up. And somebody at some point had put a fringe around the outside of it. And the fringe was kind of loose. And he stuck his hand through the fringe. And he says, does anybody want this rag? And I was clear at the back. And I stood there and I thought, is anybody going to bid on that? And I bought it for almost nothing. I just couldn't believe it when he said that. And then later I found this one. I don't,
so
again.
how old is it?
How old is it? Again, up until from late 1700s to, 1850s probably.
I can imagine how many of these you got thrown away.
No, oh yeah,
Yeah.
or cut up.
Yeah.
In fact, the one that's on the table that I just bought
Thanks.
at Thanksgiving, that's what they said on the sign. Buy this and cut it up and make pillows out of it. So I bought it. Then this one I brought again just because it's a really nice coverlet, and I could find the name of it. Finding the names is difficult. And this one is a variation of traditional roses and rings. So can you see the roses and the rings?
Yep.
And I have another one at home much like this one.
Oh, really quite weighty. I mean, this
They're heavy.
They're heavy.
Yeah. And then, in a way, it's too bad I covered this one up because I bought this one for this program. This one I bought in Maine. And this is the example of the white fabric holding
Oh,
the piece together. The yarn's all gone, but I mean the wool. This is very well done. It's very fine. The spinning's very fine. I don't think any of these cotton. I don't think any of the cotton. I think all of them are linen. I mean, all of them are cotton and wool. And I don't think any of the cotton was hand spun. I think by then you could do it. The wool probably is. But this one is exceedingly fine. And I set out to see if I could find the name of it. And I have a book called Keep Me Warm One Night, which many years ago I went to a bookstore to buy. And the woman looked at me and she says, "We do not sell pornography." And I said, "Excuse me." But in process of moving around, I lost that book, so I have now replaced it. And it's a whole lot more expensive now than it was then. But it was done in Canada. And I looked through the pattern book or the book of patterns from the States, and I couldn't find it. So I got out that book, Keep Me Warm One Night, and there it was. And according to the people that put that together, the one that they had was either woven in PEI or Cape Breton. And having gotten it in Maine, I want to think that's where it was woven. And the pattern is called, it's a variation of Freemason's Felicity. And do come up and look at it later because it is really a fine piece. And it's huge. It's 3 pieces across instead of just 2. So these people had a big bed. So, yeah, maybe a lot of kids. Okay, thank you for now. So, jumping kind of back into other things. I think we all know the process of wool and how we get wool, or how we get woolen yarn. But I did bring my walking wheel just because most people don't use them anymore. And it's my favorite spinning wheel. The only thing wrong with them is they take up a lot of room. This wheel I bought when I worked at Connor Prairie. I was a single mom. I didn't feel like I had any money. And a woman came into we did first person, so we were interpreting people as if we were those people. And this woman came in and she says, "Do you know anybody that would like to buy a spinning wheel?" And of course I stayed in character and I said, "Well, ma'am, no, I don't think so. Most of us who want a spinning wheel, we already have one." And she looked at me. Calmed her head. I remember I was sitting at the loom when she was kind of at the side of me, and she goes, "Well, I've got this spinning wheel I want to sell." Well, I dropped out of character and I turned around and I looked at her and I said, "So what kind of wheel do you have?" She says, "Oh, it's this kind." She gets out a little golden book encyclopedia. It had a picture of a walking wheel about like this. And I said, "Is it really like that picture?" And she says, "Uh-huh." And I said, "Where do you live?" And she told me. And I said, "I go right by your house, just going home." And I did, every day. And I said, "You gonna be home this evening?" "Yeah." So I decided I'd stop in all the way driving. The rest of the afternoon, going to her house. I am not buying a spinning wheel. I cannot afford a spinning wheel. I am not buying a spinning wheel. I went in and we went upstairs, and the wheel was sitting there in a window. This part, this head was gone. And I stood there and I looked at the daintiness of this wheel, and just the table's really cocked. It's very different, and I thought, I gotta have that wheel. And so I asked her how much she wanted for it. She wanted $100, and so I said, "Okay, I'll buy it." Then I went to my mom and I said, "Mom, can I borrow $100? And I bought the wheel. And I worked at Connor at that time. I worked in the craft department. And I worked for 3 blacksmiths, 3 carpenters, woodworkers, 3 potters, and our boss was a gunsmith. All men. And so I came carrying in my wheel, and I said, "Okay, guys, can you fix this for me?" So the woodworker made this part. The blacksmith made the spindle. And I had my spinning wheel. As you can see, at some point, my cat knocked it over and broke some of the spokes. And I had to have it worked on by a man up in Cabot, Vermont. That was after I moved here. But spinning on a walking wheel where you got room to work, you just walk back and forth. You can see why it's called a walking wheel. These wheels were relatively common in Europe by the 14th century. And then like I said, in the 16th century, they put the treadle and the flyer on it, on the spinning wheel, and they produced much faster. But people continued to use the walking wheel for wool. In fact, they continued to use a walking wheel for wool a long time after there was machinery to spin wool. Because weavers didn't think that you could spin it as well on a machine as you could on a walking wheel. So this little wheel is Southern. If you're familiar with the walking wheels from New England, they're bigger, they're taller, the wheels, the band is broader, and the table's not cocked as much. These are to hold the roll eggs after you work them, so you've got some handy. And the man who worked on it here in Vermont said that it was really an old one. He put it towards the end of the 1700s, but there's no way to know for sure. Probably came out of Virginia. The woman that I bought it from had traded for dolls, but then never used it. Well, you know, I had the way to fix it, which most people didn't. Oh, it's slick. I'm spinning Gotland wool, which is about as far away from Vermont as you can get. Gotland is a big island off the coast of Sweden, and it's a very primitive breed. It's just gotten popular, and I made the mistake of buying some. I didn't need to buy wool.
Seems like
There's
it's
been
a lot
ones
harder
you
not
didn't
to use only one hand for the, get the knots out of it, yeah.
You pull out with your left hand. That's the difference between working with the treadle wheel. You've got both hands.
Yeah, both hands, yeah.
The walking wheel, you have one hand. You use your left hand to pull the fibers out.
It's awful hard to get all the thick and thin spots where they sit. Oh, pretty clever.
Well, if you went to the farm show and you looked at the Goat and Sheep Association's yarn, let me tell you, there was a couple there that had supposedly been spun on suspended spindles or drop spindles, and it was about as even as commercial yarn. It was incredible. Wool likes to be warm. So when you see pictures in a log cabin of women standing in front of a fireplace to spin, that's not for her. It's for the wool. You cannot spin it once that grease, and there's grease in it, no matter how much you wash it. I used to, on cool days, want to spin, and I'd stick my basket of wool in the fireplace right along the side, keep it warm. So back to beds. They had curtains around them. If you picture a four-posted bed, they had curtains around them. That was for privacy, but warmth, primarily for warmth. In the bed like we have at the log cabin, we might have had curtains that hung on the wall. They were attached to the ceiling and would have, again, used for warmth and privacy. So just a little bit of history on spinning here in America. We were English, obviously. We traded everything with England. They didn't expect us to make much of our own things, and we didn't. We were getting things from England. Well, that kind of fell apart in the 1640s, which is about 100 years earlier than I thought. I really need to owe an apology to all the people that have come to the Tunbridge Fair, and I have told them that we really didn't need to spin and weave very much until the men in the South, or in the Massachusetts and Virginia and folks decided that we were going to become our own country. And then we had to go to work. Well, it happened in the 1660s. There was a civil war in England, and that was the first time that the colonists couldn't get textiles that they needed. And Massachusetts passed a general court legislation asking farmers to raise more sheep and flax. And before that time, spinning wheels and looms were really rare here. But fate stepped in. The West Indies was divided up between Britain, France, and Spain. And from these islands, Britain imported sugar and slaves, but also cotton wool. Before this, cotton had come from India and was very expensive. In fact, linen was called the poor man's cotton. Because you could grow linen. We could grow flax, we couldn't grow linen. In 1660, 40% of the residents of Plymouth Plantation in southern Mass were listed to have spinning wheels. In 1699, the English law forbade the exporting of American goods of raw wool, yarn, or finished fabrics. Also, it was forbidden to carry these goods from one colony to the next, because they were going to make sure that we were going to buy what we needed from England and not raise it ourselves. But it was the people from Ireland and Scotland and Germany were the immigrants that brought to us the ability to do this textile work. The work is time consuming. It was well divided. It was divided up between male and female members of families. And I have been told that men were the primary coverlet weavers. Although Laurel Thatcher Ulrich kind of blew me out of the water as I was reading that, because her coverlets were all woven by women, but she writes about women too, primarily. But many weavers were also farmers, and they would weave in the winter. And as I've always said, you can't weave in the summertime. There's no time. By studying early 1700s probate court records, the men's diaries, we get an idea of the life of a farmer weaver/weaver. One such diary was from Connecticut. The shearing of sheep was done in early spring, along with getting the land ready to plant. Farming continued throughout the summer with a reference to pulling flax in July, and in August he paid a hired girl for spinning. But it wasn't until December he wove a coverlet and began to weave a rug. The family, the girls, would have done the spinning, and as I mentioned, the definition for spinster was someone who spun. By the early 1800s, and probably earlier, many men were in the business of strictly coverlet weaving. They would set their looms up, and it's a little hard to see it on this little loom, but they would have 4, what we call harnesses, and they would plan out a pattern that they enjoyed doing and knew how to do and had the material, or could get the material to do. They would weave a piece, leave a piece of the pattern on those harnesses, and then hang them up on the wall. If you wanted a coverlet, you would go into that man's shop and say, I like that one, but I want it in gold and blue, navy. And you would spin the wool. If you had the ability to dye the wool, you could, but it probably was done by a professional dyer. Then you would take it to the weaver, and he would weave it off for you. Unlike us people today who wants to do everything, want to try everything, weavers would do maybe a half a dozen patterns. They didn't do a little bit of everything like we try to today. Women would weave our own household textiles, fabric for toweling, sheeting, tablecloths, and curtains. There were few professional women weavers too. Home production continued here in this Appalachian chain from up in Maine down to Georgia until at least the beginning of the 20th century. And I've always said I've been really glad that they did, because that's where we got the knowledge of how to do all of this. Otherwise, I think it probably would have been pretty well lost. So that's the story of coverlets and weaving and spinning, and I've sure had fun, and I have no idea what time it is. But I've got 2 people who brought their own coverlets. You want to come up and share them with them?
No,
Please.
you can just hold it up.
Waste of time. You may need
Tired.
Teresa again.
Yeah, I'll meet Teresa again.
So there's time to take questions.
Yes, okay, thank you. This is another one like mine with the reverse. So what she called that, a double, free plain double cloth.
Oh,
And if you grab a hold of these, where the navy blue is, you can pull it apart. There really is 2 layers of fabric in here.
wow.
And and this I think is another variation of the one I had. In fact, it's a variation of mine. Just doesn't have the trees along the border.
It's got like a rolled
Yep,
hem.
a rolled hem. And you said it was family?
Yeah, I've inherited it, yeah. It's been going through a few generations.
Well, yeah,
Beautiful.
all of them have. But really nice.
Nice.
They're heavy.
That'll keep you warm.
Come on, let's get to it.
Then Kay brought in this one, which is a whole nother animal. This is a jacquard. And jacquard coverlets, where it is, there it is in that corner. Jacquard was a Frenchman that took, he improved upon, let's put it like that, a head that went on looms that controlled many, many threads. Up at Marshfield, they've just now gotten together a jacquard loom, and they're hoping to find somebody who wants to spend some time and money learning how to run it. These are the coverlets that were made pictures. They were primarily they were made in Pennsylvania. This one's dated 1852 in Allen County? Allentown. So it's a prime example of the jacquard coverlets out of Pennsylvania. There were also many jacquard weavers in Indiana. I've got a little book. In fact, there were 2 in my home area. So as people moved west, and again, as I said, there were a lot of Germans in Indiana. They brought that with them. But they're really quite elegant. I do not own any jacquards. I never could find one I could afford.
Wow.
And again, Kay, you said this is family. And both of them are just in perfect shape. It's just wonderful to have something that nice. It's beautiful. And thank you both for bringing them. I'll have to fold that up. Oh, my nose just...
Use your apron.
So, questions? Anybody got questions?
I got a million of them.
Yeah, a million of them.
I'm stunned at the amount of labor involved in
Yeah.
flax.
That's amazing.
How many acres of flax would you have to grow to end up with a bed sheet, let's say? And how many years of work would it take to?
I'm figuring, and I don't know this for sure, I think an ordinary farmer would maybe grow a half to an acre, but part of that would have been seed for next year and linseed oil, because linseed oil is where we got paint.
Yep.
It was used in paint. So it doesn't take an awful lot to have the amount of linen that you want. But by the time you pull your linen, do all that work, and get ready to spin it, you've probably lost 2/3 of your crop.
Wow.
And so it was very labor intensive, but very rewarding. You know, it might take you a year from the time you put that seed in the ground till you got a sheet to use, but it's going to last you 100 years. And I think that's the one big difference about that time period. time was not a commodity.
Oh, yeah.
Time became a commodity when we got factories and whistles and bells. It was more important that we had quality, as you can see in all these things.
Wasn't it during World War I where there was a shortage of wool and the encouraging people to raise sheep for
Right.
wool for the servicemen?
And the wool resurges when we have wars. Of course, it won't now, because we've got so many in synthetics, but, yeah.
But that changed the landscape of the Vermont a lot with the
Right. Well,
sheep farm, yeah.
from, yeah, World War,
Yeah.
the Civil War, and before that, and the Civil War and World War I. Yeah. You had, okay,
Yeah, well, I mean, just, were quilts used for summer time, or were people using these end quilts, or,
quilting, to my knowledge, and I'm not a quilter.
okay.
I love them, and I sleep under it all the time. But quilting came along when cotton got cheap.
Oh, I see, so it wasn't parallel,
Not much.
okay.
By 18, what's Lowell say? In the 1830s, you could buy cotton for 23 cents a yard. And like I said, you know, in the earlier part, until Britain could get cotton out of the West Indies and we could grow enough to supply us, ourselves, linen was the poor man's cotton. So, you just don't find a lot of quilts early. You'll have the whole cloths, and there were a few of those still around that were made right at the beginning of the 19th century, late 1700s, but not very many. And none of us would have had cotton on today. We all would have had wool on. I mean, my cotton dress is absolutely wrong. Partially because if you're cooking around a fireplace, cotton's very flammable. We should have worn wool.
Is linen?
Linen doesn't, it burns pretty quick. The black powder men love the tow because you can use a spark and it'll take off.
Huh.
At the fair, I always give it to the guys.
So how many, I guess I want to know, how many quilts would the female head of household be making or have made in her lifetime? I mean, if they last long, I mean, you might make one for your daughter as she gets married and stuff, okay. There might be a special occasion one, but, I mean, we buy so much now, it's even hard to think when you said a sheet could last 100 years. And so can these, as we're seeing from the dates, but would it be something that you make and then
I think
only
it
if
would
you got a
depend
second
on your
bed?
needs and your time. I mean, toweling's gonna wear out. You know, if you have one sheet on a bed and you really want another sheet, so the next year you might grow some flax and get yourself a sheet. They're really not a real good way to know, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
Toweling wears out. Things that you used all the time wore out. So that's why the women were doing that elementary, what I call elementary weaving. Doesn't mean it was plain or ugly or not well done. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you've been to Shelburne, they've got some gorgeous textiles up there. Just plain everyday ordinary work.
And these would be so hard to keep clean, huh? To clean it.
Well, they washed them. You know, I mean, I want to wash this one come summer. I wanted to wash it for this show or this program, but I had no real way to dry it.
Yeah.
And I have used my washer as a tub and then spin it out. But this is so big it wouldn't go in my washer. So I'm gonna have to do it all outside and then lay it out. I'll probably just lay it on the grass. Let the grass work, let the sunshine work.
The sun go, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Ben?
I was just wondering, you said, well, I was thinking something that took so many months or a year would probably been something that would be valuable that could be traded? Or would that, if you had extra, would that be something that would be
I don't know that they I think they traded work as more than maybe an item.
You also said that a mattress might be the most valuable thing a person,
A feather bed, yeah.
a feather bed, so that consists of, I mean, the frame and everything.
Oh, a bed, yeah.
When you said it was the most valuable, I wasn't sure if it was a component of the bed or.
It was the feather bed. A feather bed that takes 50 pounds of feathers.
Okay.
That's what I always told people at Connor, that was the most expensive. And the probate court records that I studied in Indiana, it cost more than a horse.
So the gathering of feathers was a big deal with that, or?
It was. It's a lot of work. I've tried it. And let me tell you, it hurts. We didn't have a saw.
So thank you very much. There's
Thank you, Kay.
refreshments. Please hold your chairs.